The rain poured without end. Grey clouds hung low over the house, and it felt as if the sun would never return. Droplets streamed down the windows, turning the world outside into a blurred, trembling stain. The living room was silent. Peppa and George sat on the rug playing with blocks, trying to ignore the gloomy day. The clock ticked too loudly. Each tick echoed in their chests like a dull thud, making the room feel even more uncomfortable. Suddenly, the front door slammed. Peppa flinched and turned her head. Mummy Pig stood in the doorway. She had returned from the shop, but something was wrong. Her dress clung to her body, soaked through. Water dripped from her hooves, leaving long trails on the floor. But what terrified Peppa most were her eyes. They were empty, not just dark. There was no reflection, no warmth, no spark of life. Just two black ovals, as if painted onto her face. Mummy Pig stood silently in the doorway. Mummy, Peppa whispered. George froze beside her, clutching his toy dinosaur tightly. Mummy Pig stepped forward. Her movements were sharp, unnatural. It was as if she wasn't walking on her own, but being pulled forward by invisible strings. The floor creaked under her heavy steps, and every sound sent a chill through Peppa's body. She pulled her brother closer, not taking her eyes off the figure in the doorway. You're not Mummy," she muttered faintly. There was no answer. Then her gaze fell on the shelf. Labubu was sitting there. Her favorite toy had always been by her side, but now it looked different. His eyes glowed with a faint red light, and the smile, usually sweet, stretched far too wide. Labubu slowly shook his head, as if warning her, "Don't believe it. That's not her." Mummy Pig drew closer. Her empty eyes were fixed on Peppa. She reached out a hoof. Her fingers looked too long, her nails sharp like claws. The air grew colder, as though all the windows had been thrown open. Peppa screamed, but no sound came out. Her voice was gone, stolen. At that moment, Labubu leapt from the shelf. His tiny hands clutched at Mummy Pig's throat. A low, guttural hiss escaped her as her body jerked, twitched, and then collapsed onto the floor. Peppa and George were frozen. Labubu stood over the fallen figure. His eyes burned brighter, and his smile grew monstrously wide. The silence was so heavy, the only sound was the children's breathing. Then the toy slowly turned. The red glow in his eyes dimmed. His smile softened back into its innocent shape. He looked as though nothing had happened. But Peppa knew. That wasn't her mummy lying on the floor. And she knew. Labubu was no ordinary toy. Night fell quickly. Outside, the rain still drummed against the windows, but inside the house, there was only dead silence. Their parents never returned. No one asked why Mummy Pig didn't get up, as if everything was normal. Peppa lay in bed, holding George close as he whimpered softly in his sleep. She stared at Labubu, sitting motionless on the shelf. The toy didn't move, but Peppa felt it. He was waiting. Then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, rising up the stairs. Peppa hugged her brother tighter. Her heart pounded as if ready to burst. The bedroom door creaked open. A tall silhouette appeared in the crack, with empty eyes. Ma," George mumbled in his sleep. Peppa quickly covered his mouth with her hoof. The figure stepped into the room. It was Mummy Pig again, or something that only looked like her. Her dress was dry now, but her eyes remained the same. Hollow, lifeless voids. Peppa felt the stare. It was so cold that her body stiffened in place. Labubu slowly lifted his head. His red eyes flared brighter. He moved his little paw, beckoning the figure closer. Peppa realized he wasn't just protecting them. He was playing. And in this game, there was no way out. One day, while Peppa and her family were walking in the park, she noticed a strange white mask lying on the ground. The mask was smooth, with no facial features, and seemed to be made of some cold, unfamiliar material. Peppa picked it up, and curiosity took over. She decided to try it on, but as soon as it touched her face, it seemed to fuse with her skin. Peppa felt her own face begin to disappear, dissolving under the smooth surface. She tried to remove it, but the mask held fast, as if it were alive. Every time Peppa tried to pull it off, she felt her face becoming increasingly foreign. Her voice became mechanical and her movements more rigid. Peppa tried to tell her parents, but they just laughed, thinking she was imagining things. They couldn't understand that the mask had already started to consume her. But Peppa noticed that her favorite toy, Labubu, was acting strangely. Normally, he sat calmly on the shelf, always quiet, but now his glassy eyes gleamed differently, and the smile on his face became more and more distorted. Peppa felt that Labubu seemed to know what was happening. His gaze followed her every movement, as if he was part of the strange events unfolding. With each passing day, the mask became more powerful. Peppa couldn't rid herself of it, and her reflection in the mirror was no longer her own. Her reflection was distorted, her face became featureless, and her eyes hollow, as if she had been turned into the mask itself. Her parents didn't notice anything. They didn't see the changes. Their memory of Peppa began to fade, and their gaze became superficial, as if she were merely a shadow of the girl she once was. But Evie, her younger sister, saw. Her little eyes full of fear followed Peppa, and Peppa knew that Evie could feel it too. Her sister saw how she was disappearing. But Evie was too young to understand what was happening. All she could do was watch Peppa in distress, trying to reach out to her, but Peppa couldn't help her. One day, when Peppa and Evie were in the bathroom, the mask began to change again. It darkened, as if it were absorbing the light around it. Evie cried out in fear, but Peppa couldn't comfort her. At that moment, Labubu, who had been sitting quietly on the shelf, began to rock slowly. His eyes glowed with a bright red light, reflecting the cold aura of the mask. Peppa felt something shift inside her. The mask was consuming her, and Labubu was now her companion, silently watching everything unfold. When Peppa and Evie stood in the bathroom, the mirror suddenly shattered with a deafening crash. Glass shards scattered across the room, and the shadow that had emerged from the mirror swiftly glided past them. Evie cried, but Peppa was too shaken to comfort her. The next morning, Peppa felt that she was no longer herself. Her reflection in the mirror was once again not her own. Labubu stood beside her, his eyes still glowing red, and the smile on his face grew more and more distorted. When Peppa looked at Evie, she noticed that her little sister now saw Labubu too. Evie sat beside him, clutching her little paws, looking at the toy with horror. But Peppa couldn't do anything. Labubu was now part of everything that was happening, and their family. The next morning, Peppa was gone. All that remained was the white mask, cold and empty, lying on her pillow. Evie felt a dark aura radiating from it. The mask was not just an object, it was something alive. Evie sensed that the mask was waiting for a new victim. Evie knew that the mask would now seek someone else to consume their identity. She watched as the mask slowly turned toward her, and Evie realized she was next. Her small heart raced in panic as she felt the cold air fill the room, and the mask began to rise slowly, as if floating in the air, moving directly toward her. Evie was the only one who could stop this, but she was too small to fight such evil. In that moment, she understood that now she and Peppa were one, and only their strength in unity could stop the dark entity. It all started the day Peppa found a strange toy in her room. It was a Labubu, a small yellow monster with big black eyes and sharp teeth. Peppa couldn't remember where it came from. "What a cute toy! Where did you come from, little one?" she asked. Labubu remained silent, but his black eyes seemed to follow Peppa's every movement. That same day, A second window appeared in her room. The new window was old and dark, completely different from Peppa's usual window. Through the murky glass, instead of the familiar yard, there was a view of a gloomy, foggy forest. And strangest of all, in the forest grew trees that looked exactly like Labubu toys. "Mummy, look at this window and this strange forest," Peppa called out. But Mummy Pig replied, "Peppa dear, there's only one window in your room. And what's that toy you're holding?" Mummy couldn't see the second window, but even stranger, she couldn't see the Labubu toy either, even though Peppa was holding it right in front of her. On the first night, Peppa placed Labubu on her bedside table and went to sleep. But in the middle of the night, she woke up to a strange sound, the quiet grinding of teeth. In a quiet, creaky voice, Labubu whispered, "Peppa, Peppa, look out the window." You can talk," Peppa gasped. She turned to the second window. In the forest, she saw hundreds of small yellow figures, exactly like her toy. They stood between the trees, staring directly at her. Every night, the army of toy Labubus in the forest grew larger. They moved closer to the window, and their black eyes glowed in the darkness like little stars. "We've come for you, Peppa. You found us, now we'll find you," Labubu said. "What do you want from me?" Peppa asked fearfully. "We want you to become one of us, forever," came the chilling reply. On the third night, Peppa woke up to find her hands had turned yellow, like Labubu's, and her eyes in the mirror seemed bigger and blacker than usual. "What's happening to me?" she cried. "You're becoming one of us. Soon you'll be able to live in our forest and we'll play forever," Labubu explained with a sinister smile. Peppa tried to throw away the Labubu toy, but it always returned to her room. She tried to close the second window, but it appeared on other walls. "Mummy! Daddy! Help me!" she screamed. But her parents couldn't see Labubu or hear his voice. To them, Peppa was just talking to herself. On the seventh night, the Labubu army came right up to the window. There were so many of them that the forest glowed with the yellow light of their bodies and the black gleam of their eyes. In chorus, they chanted, "It's time, Peppa. Time to join us." Peppa looked at herself in the mirror. Her skin had turned completely yellow. Her eyes were big and black, and the same horrifying smile as Labubu's appeared on her face. I'm ready," she said in a voice that now sounded like Labubu's. The second window opened by itself. Cold wind from the Labubu forest rushed into the room. Peppa, now looking more like a toy than a pig, stepped toward the window and disappeared into the night. In the morning, Mummy Pig came into Peppa's room to wake her up, but the bed was empty. On the windowsill lay only a small yellow Labubu toy with big black eyes. "Peppa, Peppa, where are you?" Mummy called out. She picked up the toy. For a moment, it seemed like Labubu winked at her and whispered quietly in a familiar voice, "I'm here, Mummy. I'll always be here." A week later, George found a strange toy in his room, a small yellow monster with big black eyes. And that same day, a second window appeared in his room. "Dinosaur! Dinosaur!" George exclaimed. "No, George, I'm Labubu, and soon you'll be Labubu too," the toy replied. In the forest beyond the window stood a figure that looked very much like Peppa, but with yellow skin and black eyes. She waved at George and smiled with Labubu's horrifying smile. Be careful with toys that appear out of nowhere. Sometimes they don't come to be played with, but to turn you into a toy. The Labubu toy Peppa found a strange toy in an old chest in the attic. A small figure with big dark eyes and a wide smile. It had a tag, Labubu. The toy was soft but cold to the touch, as if it had been kept in a freezer for a long time. "Can I take it to my room?" Peppa asked Mummy Pig. "Of course, dear. But wash it first, it's very dusty." Peppa took Labubu to her room and placed it on the shelf next to her other toys. The toy stared straight ahead with an unmoving gaze. Something about its smile seemed wrong, too wide for such a small face. At night, Peppa woke up to a strange sound, quiet rustling, as if someone was crawling on the floor. She turned on the nightlight and looked around the room. Everything was in its place, but Labubu had disappeared from the shelf. "Where is it?" Peppa muttered, getting out of bed. She found the toy under the bed, lying on its side. Strange! How could it have gotten there? Peppa picked up Labubu and put it back on the shelf. The toy seemed heavier than before, and its smile had become even wider. The next day, Peppa was playing with George in the living room. Suddenly, she heard the patter of little feet upstairs. "Mummy, someone's walking in my room," Peppa said. "There's no one there, dear. Maybe it's mice." But when Peppa went up to her room, Labubu was not on the shelf again. This time, it was standing in the middle of the room, turned toward the door. Its pose was as if it had been waiting for Peppa. "How did you get here?" Peppa whispered, carefully approaching the toy. Labubu was silent, but its eyes seemed to follow Peppa's every movement. The girl quickly grabbed the toy and put it back on the shelf, but this time turned it to face the wall. At night, the rustling repeated, but now it was louder. Peppa woke up and saw that Labubu was standing by her bed, looking straight at her. In the darkness, its eyes glowed with a faint greenish light. "What do you want from me?" Peppa whispered, not daring to move. The toy didn't answer, but slowly raised one hand, as if it wanted to touch Peppa. The girl screamed and turned on the light. Labubu instantly became an ordinary toy lying on the floor. "Mummy! Daddy! What happened?" asked Mummy Pig, running into the room. "Labubu! It was moving! It was standing by my bed! It's just a toy, dear. It can't move." But Peppa saw the truth in Labubu's dark eyes. The next day, she tried to throw the toy away, but it kept returning to her room. First in the trash can, then in the garden, even when Peppa took it to the neighbors. Labubu always found its way back. It began appearing in the most unexpected places. In Peppa's school bag, in the refrigerator, even in the bathroom. Each time its smile became wider and its eyes brighter. One night, Peppa woke up and found that all her toys had lined up in a row, looking at the bed. And in the center stood Labubu, like a commander of an army. "Now you understand," whispered a voice that seemed to come from all the toys at once. "I'm not just a toy, I'm a collector. And now you're part of my collection." Peppa wanted to scream but couldn't move. Her body was becoming stiffer, like a toy. She felt her skin turning to plastic and her thoughts slowing down. "Don't worry," said Labubu, coming closer. "Being a toy isn't so bad. You'll play forever. With me." In the morning, Mummy Pig found a new toy in Peppa's room, very similar to her daughter. It stood on the shelf next to Labubu, with the same wide smile and motionless gaze. "Strange, I don't remember buying this toy," Mummy Pig muttered, adjusting the little dress of the toy Peppa, and Labubu stood nearby, its smile even wider. Now it had a friend, forever. But Labubu's collection wasn't complete yet. In the evening, it heard George playing in the next room. It was time to find a new friend, Peppa Pig. The second window. Peppa's room had always had one window. Everyone knew that. Peppa, Mummy Pig, Daddy Pig, even George. From that window, she could see their yard, the swing, the flower bed. Everything was normal. But one morning, Peppa woke up and felt an unusual chill. She yawned, stretched, sat up in bed, and froze. On the other wall, there was a window, a second one. It had never been there before. Peppa jumped out of bed and walked up to it. It was narrower and taller than her usual window. The frame was dark, old, the glass cloudy like it had a layer of dust. Beyond it was a forest. Not their yard, not the street, a forest. Tall grey trees without leaves. A pale sky. mist curling between the trunks. Peppa backed away. She looked through her usual window. There was their yard. George was playing with his dinosaur. Everything as it should be. She turned back to the second window. The forest. Still. But it felt like someone was hiding behind the trees, watching. "Mummy?" she called. Mummy Pig came up the stairs and entered the room. "Yes, Peppa? I have a window." "Of course you have a window," Mummy smiled. "Everything's fine." "No, not that one. Another one. There's a forest." Mummy looked where Peppa pointed. "There's a wall, sweetie," she said. "You probably had a dream. Try to sleep a little more." And she left. Peppa stayed alone. The window was still there. During the day she tried to forget, played with George, drew pictures. But when she returned to her room in the evening, the window had moved lower, almost level with her eyes. The forest was the same, but the mist was thicker, and there was a figure among the trees, black, still. The face was unclear. Peppa pulled the curtain shut, tight, and stayed away. At night, she woke up. The curtain had been pushed aside. A pale light shone from the window, and Peppa saw the figure had moved closer. It was now standing right at the glass. It didn't move, but now she could see the face. It looked like her, just stretched, eyes too wide, a thin, strange smile. Peppa screamed. Mummy ran in. The light came on. The window was gone. "You had another dream, darling," said Mummy. "Everything's all right." But Peppa didn't believe her. The next morning, the window was back, on a different wall. Every day it changed position, sometimes behind the bed, sometimes beside the door. The forest never changed. The figure kept getting closer. Peppa started leaving notes on the windowsill. "Who are you?" she wrote. But in the morning, they'd be gone. And one morning, words had been scratched into the glass from the inside. "You look out the window, but I'm inside." That day, Peppa didn't go to school. She sat in the corner of her room, by her normal window, breathing quietly. From behind her, a rustle. The curtain moved on its own. She didn't turn around. Now, the window is always there. But no one else sees it. Not Mummy, not Daddy. Even George says there's nothing there. And sometimes, at night, it opens.
The mysterious shadow. One evening, as Peppa and her family were preparing for dinner, the house started to grow dark faster than usual. Daddy Pig turned on the living room light, but the bulb immediately went out, leaving the room in semi-darkness. Soon, the lights in the whole house started to dim, and Peppa felt that something was wrong. Mummy Pig tried to turn on other lights, but without success. Peppa suggested opening the windows to let in some light, but when they did, there was nothing visible outside. No yard, no familiar trees, just endless darkness. Peppa closed the window, but the feeling of unease didn't go away. Daddy Pig suggested they go outside and see what was happening. But as soon as he opened the door, the entire house was suddenly plunged into complete darkness. Peppa, Mummy, and Daddy stood in the dark hallway, hearing only each other's footsteps and a faint rustling sound. Then Peppa noticed a strange shadow moving across the walls. At first, she thought it was just the play of light, but the shadow became clearer and more unnatural. Peppa tried to call out to her parents, but they didn't respond, their faces empty. The shadow began to move closer, and Peppa felt her heart tighten with fear. She tried to find the light switch, but couldn't remember where it was. At that moment, the shadow appeared right in front of her. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a creature with huge, soulless eyes and a twisted body. Peppa screamed in terror, and at that moment, the light flickered back on. The shadow disappeared, as if it had never been there. But Peppa couldn't forget what she had seen. When she returned to her parents, they seemed just like usual, but something about their behavior was strange. They didn't notice how quickly it had gotten dark, nor were they concerned about the lights going out. Peppa decided she had to stay on guard. And though everything returned to normal, at night in her room, She often saw strange shadows sliding across the walls, sometimes moving as though they were watching her.